clock on the wall of Melody's diner ticked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, marking off another dreary Tuesday afternoon. Outside, a soft, persistent rain plastered the streets, turning the faded neon sign of the diner into a blurry, glowing smear. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, sizzling grease, and a faint, unsettling hint of something charred. Elsie the cook leaned heavily against the stainless steel counter, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her apron, once crisp white, was now a canvas of various stains. A splash of tomato sauce here, a smudge of mustard there, and an insistent, dark streak that spoke of a recent regrettable encounter with a pan that had gotten too hot. Her shoulders ached, her feet throbbed, and her mind felt like a tangled ball of yarn. Bills, always the bills. The rent for her tiny apartment, the steadily rising cost of her mother's medication, the broken-down car that refused to start this morning. Adding a frantic bus ride to her already packed day, Elsie wasn't just cooking at Melody's. She was barely staying afloat. Her dream, once a bright, vibrant thing, had been packed away years ago, tucked into a dusty box in the back of her closet, labeled Someday. Someday seemed very far away these days. The diner wasn't exactly bustling. A couple of truckers sat hunched over coffee mugs at the counter, their low voices a steady drone. In a booth by the window, a woman picked absently at a grilled cheese sandwich, staring out at the rain. Elsie preferred it this way. Less rush, less chance for things to go wrong. But even with the slow pace, her concentration was shot. She'd already almost dropped a stack of plates and oversalted the soup. A bell above the door jingled, and Elsie automatically straightened up, putting on her practiced diner smile. A man walked in, shaking the rain from a dark tailored suit. He wasn't like the usual clientele. He moved with a quiet grace, his shoulders broad, his hair slicked back perfectly. He wore dark sunglasses, even indoors, which struck Elsie as a little odd on such a dim day. Took a seat at a booth near the back, pulling out a newspaper and holding it up effectively, shielding his face from view. Table 7, Elsie Sal, the waitress, with hair piled high in a beehive, called out her voice, raspy from years of shouting orders. "Just a coffee for now?" "Says he's thinking about food." Elsie nodded, pouring a fresh cup and setting it on the counter for Sal to deliver. Her mind, however, immediately went back to the mental list of things she needed to do, the phone calls she needed to make. She tried to focus, to push everything else away, but it was like trying to hold back a tide with her bare hands. A few minutes later, Sal returned. "Okay, Elsie, he's ready. He wants the Heartbreak Hotel. Special, a classic diner burger. Fries and a cheese omelet, and make that omelet extra fluffy," he said. Elsie chuckled weakly. "Heartbreak Hotel Special. What's that?" "A new menu item. He seems kind of private. Just get that omelet. Perfect, Elsie." "Right, perfect," Elsie muttered, feeling a fresh wave of anxiety. An omelet simple, right. But the thought of getting it wrong, especially for a customer who seemed to have specific requests, made her stomach clench. She slapped a patty onto the grill, pulled a basket of fries from the freezer, and cracked 3 eggs into a bowl. She whisked them vigorously, humming a forgotten tune under her breath. Or she tried to hum. Her thoughts kept drifting back to her mom's doctor appointment. Next week, the letter from the landlord. Her hands slipped, and the whisk clattered against the side of the bowl. She frowned, took a deep breath, and poured the egg mixture into the hot buttered pan. The sizzle was immediate, promising. Elsie watched the edges set, then reached for the cheese. Just as she was about to sprinkle it, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Her heart leaped. It was her sister. Maybe the test results were in her hand froze. Hovering over the pan, she debated ignoring it, but the urge to check was overwhelming. Just a quick glance. She fumbled for the phone, pulling it out and glancing. Not her sister. It was a reminder from the bank about an overdraft fee. Her shoulders slumped, of course. Just another thing. Her attention fractured for just a second was enough. A faint acrid smell began to drift through the kitchen. Elsie's eyes snapped back to the pan. The beautiful golden edges of the omelet were no longer golden. They were dark, too dark. A deep, ominous brown was creeping inward, and a wisp of smoke curled lazily upwards. "No," she whispered, a wave of despair washing over her. She snatched the pan off the heat, her heart pounding. The bottom of the omelet was utterly, irrevocably burnt. Not just a little crispy, but a deep charcoal black in places. Kind of black that leaves a bitter taste in your mouth and a lingering stench in the air. She stared at it, her hands trembling. It was ruined completely, utterly ruined, just like everything else today. She could try to scrape off the burnt parts, but it would be obvious. It would be a cheat. She couldn't serve this. "Sorry, I was worried about my finances and wasn't paying attention. So your meal is inedible?" She wanted to groan, to stomp her foot, to just walk out of the diner right now and never look back. The smell of burnt egg permeated the kitchen. A stark reminder of her distraction, her exhaustion, her failure. She stared at the charred disc in the pan, then at the still waiting burger and fries. She had to present it. There was no escaping it. With a heavy sigh, Elsie plated the burger and fries, carefully placing the burnt omelet on the side almost as an afterthought, hoping it wouldn't be too noticeable, but it was. It was glaringly obvious. The dark sunglasses couldn't hide the fact that his customer, whoever he was, would immediately see the disaster she had made. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. How would he react? Would he yell? Would he demand a new one? Or worse, would he just leave? Shaking his head at the incompetence of Melody's diner, Elsie dreaded finding out. Elsie pushed the plate across the pass-through window with a reluctant hand. "Table 7. Sal," she mumbled, trying to keep her voice even. "The Heartbreak Hotel's special." Sal, ever the professional, grabbed the plate without a second glance. "Looks good, Elsie. Hope he likes it." She sailed out into the dining room, her beehive bobbing with each step. Elsie stood frozen in the kitchen, peering through the small opening, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched Sal approach the booth. She watched her set the plate down. She watched the customer, still mostly hidden behind his newspaper, lower it slightly, and then he lowered it completely. Elsie's breath caught in her throat. The man wasn't just a man. He was the man Elvis Presley. Her mind reeled. Not here in Melody's diner on this rainy Tuesday afternoon. The unmistakable swoop of his dark hair, the chiseled jawline, those famous blue eyes, even behind the dark lenses of his sunglasses, there was no mistaking him. He was even more handsome, more commanding in person than in the glossy magazines and on the flickering television screen. He removed his sunglasses, slowly, deliberately, his gaze falling first on the plate. Elsie watched, transfixed, as his eyes took in the perfectly cooked, the golden fries, and then her stomach twisted, the undeniably unmet. Palms began to sweat. She braced herself. This was it. The king of rock and roll served a culinary disaster. He would be furious. He had every right to be. She imagined the headlines. Elvis served charred meal at grimy diner. Cook fired. But his reaction wasn't what she expected. Not anger, not even a flicker of annoyance. He simply stared at the omelet for a long moment, a peculiar, unreadable expression on his face. Then slowly his gaze lifted, seeking her out. Elsie felt exposed, vulnerable, as his famous blue eyes met hers. Through the pass-through, she ducked her head slightly, wanting to disappear. She mumbled an apology, though he was too far away to hear it. She needed to go out there. She needed to grovel. Taking a shaky breath, Elsie pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and walked towards the booth, her apron suddenly feeling like a lead blanket. Sal was already there, looking a little flustered herself. She hadn't recognized him at first, but now a faint blush was creeping up her neck. "Mr. Presley," Elsie began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. The omelet, it's burnt. I can make you another one. Right away on the house, of course. Anything you want. I got distracted. I'm truly sorry." She gestured helplessly at the offending dish, her cheeks burning with shame. Elvis looked from the omelet to Elsie, then back to the omelet. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips. It wasn't a mocking smile, or an amused one. It was something else, something soft, almost sad. He picked up a fork and gently poked the charred edge of the omelet. He didn't wince, he didn't frown. Distracted, huh, darlin'? His voice was even deeper, richer than on the radio. It wasn't a question, but a statement of understanding. He looked up at Elsie again, and this time his smile was a little clearer, a little warmer. It was still unexpected. "Yes, sir," Elsie mumbled, wringing her hands. My mind was elsewhere. It's no excuse. I know it's completely unprofessional. Please, let me make you a fresh one. It'll be perfect this time, I promise." Elvis leaned back in the booth, his gaze never leaving Elsie's face. He seemed to be looking at her, not just through her. It was an unnervingly intense, yet oddly gentle look. "You know," he said slowly, his voice a low drawl, "my mama always said that sometimes the best lessons are the burnt ones." He paused, then picked up a piece of the burnt omelet with his fork. He brought it close to his nose, sniffing it. Elsie braced herself for a disgusted reaction, but he simply nodded as if confirming something to himself. "And sometimes," he continued, still holding the charred piece, "when something gets burnt, it just means you were thinking about something else that was more important at the time." He finally placed the tiny piece of burnt omelet into his mouth. Elsie's eyes widened in horror. He actually ate it. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. "Taste of regret, ain't it?" he said. But there was no malice in his voice, only a profound understanding. "Don't you worry, darling. No need to rush back to that hot stove just yet. This is fine. It tells a story." Elsie could only stare, dumbfounded. He wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding a new meal. He was philosophical. The sheer unlikeliness of the situation left her speechless. She'd prepared for a tirade, for humiliation. Instead, she got this quiet gaze, a gentle smile, and a strange, comforting wisdom from the king himself. Her panic began to recede, replaced by a bewildering curiosity. What kind of man was this, really? Elsie remained rooted to the spot, trying to process the surreal interaction. Elvis Presley, eating her burnt omelet, and offering quiet wisdom. It was like a scene from a dream, or perhaps a very strange movie. Sal, who had been hovering nervously, finally found her voice. "Mr. Presley, are you sure Elsie makes the best omelets in town when she's well, when she's not distracted?" She shot Elsie a quick, worried glance. Elvis chuckled softly. It was a rich, warm sound that filled the small diner. "Positive, ma'am. This omelet, in its own way, is quite memorable." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes still on Elsie. "You said you got distracted, darlin'. Mind if I ask what's on your mind sometimes? Just saying it out loud can make the smoke clear a bit." Elsie was taken aback. This wasn't a celebrity demanding perfection. This was a man showing genuine concern. Question, so simple and direct, chipped away at her carefully constructed facade. She usually kept her struggles locked away, tucked deep inside where no one could see them. But something about Elvis's calm, patient gaze made her want to tell him everything. "It's a lot, Mr. Presley," she admitted, feeling a flush creep up her neck again. "Just life. You know, bills. My mother is not doing so great. My car broke down, and I feel like I'm always running, but never really getting anywhere." She gestured vaguely towards the kitchen. "This job, it pays the bills, but it's not what I ever wanted to do." Elvis nodded slowly, thoughtfully. He took another bite of his burger, chewing deliberately. He didn't interrupt, just listened. It was a rare kind of listening, the kind that made you feel truly heard. "What did you want to do, Elsie?" he asked, his voice gentle. The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her that, so long since she'd even allowed herself to think about it. I used to paint, she confessed, the words tasting rusty on her tongue. Used to dream of being an artist, or maybe a musician even. Played a little guitar, wrote some songs. She gave a short, mirthless laugh. Kid stuff, really. Dreams you put away when reality hits. No dream is kid stuff, Elsie, Elvis said, his voice firm but kind. He set down his burger. And reality's a funny thing. It can be a cage or it can be a canvas. Depends on how you look at it. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. You know, when I was starting out, there were plenty of burnt meals. Not just food, but opportunities. Doris telling me I'd never make it. That my music was too wild, too much. There were times I thought about quitting, walking away from it all, just going back to driving a truck. Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world, talking about almost giving up about his own burnt meals. It was a jarring, humbling thought. They tell you where not to go, or they remind you to pay attention, or they make you appreciate the good parts even more. He gestured subtly at her omelet. This omelet, darlin, it's not just a burnt breakfast. It's a testament to the weight on your shoulders and a reminder that even when things char, there's still a whole lot of good on the plate. Elsie felt a prickle behind her eyes. It wasn't just the fact that it was Elvis talking to her, but what he was saying. He wasn't being preachy or arrogant. He was sharing a piece of himself, making her feel like they were just two people, one of them famous, talking about life's hardships. His words, simple yet profound, began to chip away at the heavy dread that had been clinging to her all day. He wasn't judging her for her mistake. He was seeing the human behind it, and that, more than anything, was completely unexpected. Elsie found herself sinking onto the edge of the booth seat opposite Elvis, completely forgetting her duties for a moment. Sal, sensing the profound shift in the atmosphere, quietly stepped away to attend to other tables, casting curious glances back. Mr. Presley, Elsie said, her voice still laced with disbelief. You're Elvis Presley. You've got everything. How could you ever understand what it's like to just be stopped? The words tumbled out before she could stop them, raw and honest. He gave a soft, knowing smile. Elsie, he said, using her name with a comfortable familiarity that made her heart flutter. Fame and fortune, they don't make you immune to troubles. They just change the kind of troubles you got. The pressure, the expectations, the loneliness sometimes that can feel like a whole mountain of burnt omelets. I tell you. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. And before all this, he gestured vaguely around the diner, as if encompassing the humble surroundings. I was just a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi. My mama worked hard. My daddy worked hard. We didn't have much. I knew what it felt like to worry about where the next meal was coming from. To wear clothes that were patched and mended. I knew what it felt like to have a dream so big it scared you, and a wallet so empty it made you want to cry. Elsie listened spellbound. This wasn't the king of Graceland, but the boy from Tupelo, the one who understood struggle. It humanized him in a way she never would have imagined. She found herself opening up even more. I had a guitar too, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Still do, actually. It's under my bed. Haven't touched it. In years too busy trying to keep the lights on. My mom. She needs a lot of care. The medical bills are piling up. And the diner just barely covers it. She felt a familiar knot of despair tightening in her chest. I wanted to go to art school, but there was never enough money. So here I am, serving burnt omelets. She managed a small, sad chuckle. Elvis reached across the table and gently tapped the side of her arm. Elsie, listen to me. This burnt omelet right here, it's a sign that you're human, that you're carrying a heavy load. And sometimes, even the strongest people stumble. It means your heart and your mind were focused on something important, something that really matters, like your mama. He looked at the offending omelet again, and this time there was a genuine warmth in his eyes. And the producer, he just stopped, looked at me and said, "Son, you sound like you're trying to keep too many plates spinning at once." He told me to go home, rest, and come back fresh. That mistake. That burnt line, it taught me that even I needed to take care of myself, to acknowledge my own limits. He leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "So this omelet, Elsie, it's a metaphor. It's life. Sometimes things get a little scorched, sometimes you get distracted by the important things, but that doesn't mean the whole meal is ruined. It just means you gotta pick yourself up, brush off the burnt bits." He made me remember to take a breath before you dive back in. Don't you ever let anyone, not even yourself, tell you your dreams are just kid stuff because life got in the way. Those dreams are the true flame inside you, darlin. Don't let them burn out. His words, spoken so simply, yet with such profound sincerity, resonated deep within Elsie. It wasn't just advice. It was an invitation to hope. An invitation to see her own struggles not as shameful failures, but as a shared human experience. From the king himself, who had once been just a struggling boy with a guitar and a dream, the burnt omelet no longer felt like a symbol of her incompetence, but a strange, unexpected bridge between her ordinary struggling life and the extraordinary life of Elvis Presley. The silence that followed Elvis's heartfelt words was different from the earlier awkward quiet. This was a comfortable silence, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Elsie found herself just looking at him, truly looking. Beyond the legend, the fame, the icon, she saw a man who had known hardship, who understood the weariness of the soul, and who carried an unexpected depth of kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Presley," Elsie said, her voice a little shaky. No one's ever talked to me like that before, about the omelet, about anything." He smiled, a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Please, Elsie, call me Elvis, and there's no need for thanks. Just telling it like I see it." He picked up his fork again, gesturing towards the plate. "Now, about this Heartbreak Hotel. Special. The burger and fries are mighty fine, but I reckon I could still use a fresh omelet. But no pressure. Darlin, take your time. Just make it exactly how you'd make it for yourself on a good day. No fancy stuff, just real." "Yes, Elvis," she said, the name feeling surprisingly natural on her tongue. "I'll make you the best omelet you've ever tasted. This time, no distractions, I promise." She stood up, a renewed sense of purpose filling her. As she turned to walk back to the kitchen, she felt his eyes on her, not judging, but encouraging. It was a powerful feeling. Back behind the grill, Elsie moved with a different kind of focus. The frantic worry about bills and her car still lingered, a dull ache in the background. But the sharp edge of despair had been blunted by Elvis's words. She cracked the eggs, her movements fluid and confident. She wasn't just making an omelet, she was making a statement that she could still do things right. That one mistake didn't define her, that she could still find pride in her work. She carefully buttered the pan, letting it heat to the perfect temperature. She poured the egg mixture in, watching it sizzle and bubble gently. She grated the cheese, sprinkling it evenly over the setting eggs. Her mind was entirely on the task at hand. No phone, no distant thoughts, just the eggs, the pan, the heat, and the quiet rhythm of cooking. As the omelet cooked, Elsie glanced out into the dining area. Elvis sat patiently sipping his coffee, occasionally taking a bite of his burger. He wasn't drawing attention to himself, despite his obvious fame. A few customers had certainly noticed him by now, whispering and pointing discreetly, but he remained unperturbed, almost oblivious to the stir he was causing. He just radiated a calm, peaceful energy. She noticed one of the truckers at the counter, staring, his mouth slightly agape. Sal was discreetly fanning herself with a menu, her eyes wide. It was surreal, having the king of rock and roll sitting in her diner, waiting for her omelet. After she had served him a burnt one, the omelet was perfect. Golden brown on the bottom, fluffy and tender with the cheese melted just right. Elsie slid it onto a fresh plate alongside a sprinkle of chopped chives. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. It was her omelet, made with care and newfound concentration. She carried it out herself. Walking with a newfound confidence, she approached the booth, her smile genuine this time. "Here you go, Elvis," she said, setting the plate down gently in front of him. "Your new omelet." He looked at it, his eyes lighting up. "Now that, Elsie," he said, taking a moment to simply admire it. "That looks like a masterpiece." He picked up his fork and cut into it, the steam rising delicately. He took a bite, then closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the taste. HM, Mom." He hummed a sound that sent a little shiver down Elsie's spine. "That's it, right there. Perfect. Thank you, darling." He looked up at her, and his eyes held a profound gratitude, not just for the food, but for the moment, for the simple, honest connection they had shared. It was a silent acknowledgement that this was more than just a meal. It was a testament to a quiet understanding, born from a burnt mistake. Elsie felt a warmth spread through her chest, deeper and more comforting than any payment could have provided. Elvis finished his omelet slowly, savoring each bite, a contented look on his face. Elsie watched him from a distance, feeling a quiet satisfaction she hadn't experienced in a long time. The few customers who were still in the diner seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. But Elvis just ate his meal, seemingly unfazed by the sudden, almost reverent hush that had fallen over Melody's diner. When he finally pushed his plate away, he gave a small, appreciative nod. "That was truly something else, Elsie. Thank you." Elsie walked over to the booth, a notepad in her hand, ready to calculate his bill. "My pleasure, Elvis. Is there anything else I can get you?" He shook his head gently. "No, darling, just the check, please." Elsie quickly scribbled down the cost of the burger, fries, and coffee. She hesitated for a moment, then crossed out the charge for the omelet. After all, the first one was burnt, and he'd waited so patiently for the second. "The omelet's on the house," she said, pushing a slip of paper across the table. Elvis looked at the bill, then at Elsie, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Nonsense, Elsie. Every bite was worth it, and then some." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. Elsie's eyes widened. He peeled off several large bills, far more than the bill required, and laid them on the table. "Keep the change, darling," he said, his voice soft, "and buy yourself something nice." It was a generous tip, probably more than she made in a week, but that wasn't the most unexpected part. He then reached into his jacket pocket again, pulling out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook and a pen. He flipped to a blank page and scribbled something, quickly tearing out the page. He folded it neatly, then placed it carefully on top of the money. "Now this," he said, pushing the folded paper towards her, "is more important than any money, Elsie. It's a reminder." Elsie's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the paper. Beneath it, he'd signed simply, "Your friend." EP. Elsie felt a rush of emotion. Hot and overwhelming tears pricked at her eyes. The money was incredible, life-changing even, but the note was a treasure beyond measure. He remembered her dream. He understood her struggle. He saw past the cook serving burnt food and saw the artist buried underneath. He stood up, tall and graceful, and offered her his hand. Elsie, still stunned, took it. His grip was firm. "Thank you for the meal, Elsie," he said, his blue eyes kind and sincere. "And thank you for the conversation. You got a good heart, darling. Don't ever forget that." He gave her a final gentle smile, then turned and walked towards the door. The other customers watched him go, a collective gasp rippling through the diner as he exited into the rainy afternoon, leaving behind a silence that vibrated with the enormity of what had just happened. Sal rushed over, her face pale. She trailed off, eyes wide, as she saw the pile of cash and the crumpled note in Elsie's hand. Elsie could only nod, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She clutched the note to her chest. The bird omelet, The mistake had led to this. Connection with a legend, a validation of her hidden self, and a message that whispered of hope. He hadn't just paid for his meal. He'd paid for her dignity, her dream, her belief in herself. It was the most unexpected, heartwarming gift she had ever received, and it had all started with a mistake. The rain had stopped by the time Elsie swept the last crumbs from the floor and locked the diner door for the night. The city lights reflected in the wet pavement, blurring into streaks of gold and red, but Elsie hardly noticed the outside world. Her mind was a whirlwind of Elvis-burnt omelets and a crumpled note that felt heavier than any gold. Back in the quiet solitude of her tiny apartment, Elsie carefully smoothed out the note on her kitchen table. "Don't let the burnt parts ruin the whole dish. And don't you ever stop singing your own song, Elsie." His elegant signature, "Your friend E. Pay," seemed to glow. She had stared at the pile of cash back at the diner. A small fortune. It would pay the landlord, cover her mother's next round of medication, maybe even get her car fixed. The immediate financial dread that had been a constant companion for months began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of relief. But it was the note, more than the money. Not just Elsie, the tired cook, but Elsie the dreamer. Elsie, the artist who had packed away her paints and her guitar in a dusty box. She walked slowly into her small bedroom, her gaze falling on the ancient, dusty acoustic guitar propped in the corner, half hidden by a stack of old magazines. It had been a gift from her father years ago, before he passed. She used to spend hours strumming chords, making up melodies, writing lyrics in a worn notebook. But life, relentless and unforgiving, had slowly squeezed out the time, the energy, and eventually the hope. She reached for it now, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool wood. It felt foreign yet familiar. She tried to remember the last time she'd played. Was it 2 years ago? 3? Hesitantly, she sat on the edge of her bed and brought the guitar into her lap. She plucked a string. It was horribly out of tune. She fumbled with the tuning pegs, her fingers stiff and uncooperative. But as she slowly, painstakingly brought each string into harmony, a faint, forgotten melody began to surface in her mind. It was a song she had started years ago, about feeling lost and invisible. But now, as the notes slowly formed, the lyrics began to shift. They were no longer just about being lost, but about finding a spark in the unexpected, about a king who saw past a burnt meal to the person underneath. She strummed a simple chord progression, her voice rusty at first, then gaining a tentative strength. It wasn't the voice of a professional singer, but it was her voice, filled with raw emotion and newfound courage. She sang about burnt toast and faded dreams, about kindness in unexpected places, about the quiet strength of holding on. She played for a long time, the familiar ache in her fingers, a welcome pain. It wasn't perfect. Her chords were clumsy, her voice wavered, but it felt good. It felt real. It felt like her again the next morning. Elsie woke up feeling different. Not just rested, but lighter. The weight on her shoulders hadn't vanished entirely, but it had shifted. It was manageable. She still had to go to work, still had to face the diner. But something had changed within her. Had melodies, Sal greeted her with wide eyes. "Elsie, honey, are you okay? You look different." "And what did he say to you? Everyone's talking about it." Elsie just smiled. "He just reminded me that sometimes even mistakes can lead to something good, and that everyone's got their own struggles, even the king." She didn't share the note. That was hers alone. But she felt the words resonating in every interaction she had. When a customer grumbled about a cold coffee, Elsie offered a genuine warm smile and a fresh cup instead of the usual tired resignation. When a dish slipped, she caught it with a calmness she hadn't known she possessed. The burnt omelet, once a symbol of her despair, had become a catalyst, a reminder that a simple act of unexpected kindness could rekindle a flame she thought had died out forever. She hadn't picked up her paints yet, but the guitar was out from under the bed, and that for Elsie was a monumental start. The story of Elvis Presley's visit to Melody's Diner spread like wildfire through the small town. Not the full story, of course. Elsie kept the details of the burnt omelet and the personal note to herself. The general buzz was that Elvis had been there, that he'd been surprisingly humble and kind, and that he'd left an astonishing tip. Customers started coming in, curious to see the place where Elvis ate. The diner, usually quiet on weekday afternoons, saw a modest increase in traffic. Sal, ever the showman, would subtly point to Elvis's booth when new faces came in. Elsie, however, found herself not just enduring the extra business, but enjoying it. The internal shift she felt after Elvis's visit began to subtly change the atmosphere of Melody's diner. Elsie, no longer bogged down by overwhelming despair, found she had more energy, more patience. When a young waiter dropped a tray of milkshakes, Elsie didn't snap, but calmly helped him clean up, offering a comforting pat on the shoulder. "It happens to the best of us," she said, remembering Elvis's words about imperfections. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who was usually quite particular, complained about her soup being too cold. In the past, Elsie would have mumbled an apology and just reheated it, feeling put upon. This time, Elsie went out to Mrs. Henderson's booth, brought her a fresh, piping hot bowl, and added a warm roll, genuinely concerned. "I hope this is just right for you, Mrs. Henderson," Elsie said with a real smile. "Sometimes you need a little extra warmth on a chilly day, don't you?" Mrs. Henderson, taken aback by the unexpected warmth, softened. "Why, thank you, Elsie. That's very kind of you. You seem brighter today." Elsie just smiled. "Someone reminded me not to let the little things burn me out." It wasn't just Elsie who changed. Sal, perhaps inspired by Elsie's newfound lightness, started humming old tunes as she served, sometimes even doing a little shuffle step. The truckers at the counter noticed the improved mood. The diner, once just a place to eat, felt a little more like a community, a little more like a home. In the quiet hours at her apartment, Elsie continued to rediscover her music. Her fingers, once clumsy on the guitar strings, slowly regained their dexterity. The rusty voice grew clearer, stronger. She began to finish the songs she'd started years ago, the ones that had been abandoned. The lyrics were different now. They spoke of resilience, of finding joy in small moments, of the power of human connection. She even started writing new ones, inspired by her experiences, especially the unexpected visit from a king. One evening, after she'd paid off the last of her most urgent bills, and even put a little aside for her mother's ongoing care, she opened the dusty box in her closet, the one labeled "Someday." Inside were her old sketchbooks, her charcoals, her watercolor paints. She took them out carefully. The paper was yellowed, the paints dried up, but the sight of them no longer brought a pang of regret. Instead, it brought a flicker of excitement. She bought new supplies, a small, inexpensive set of watercolors, and a fresh pad of paper. Her first attempts were clumsy lines, unsteady colors, muddy, but she didn't get discouraged. She remembered Elvis's words, "The path to perfection is often paved with imperfections." She embraced the mistakes, learning from them just as she had learned from the burnt omelet. She found herself sketching the faces of the regulars, at the diner capturing Sal's beehive, the trucker's weary eyes, Mrs. Henderson's gentle smile. She drew the worn counter, the flickering neon sign, even the view from the kitchen window. She was seeing the world around her with new eyes, not just as a burden, but as inspiration. Elsie hadn't become a famous artist overnight, or a rock star, but she was no longer just Elsie, the tired cook. She was Elsie the cook, who was also a musician, an artist, a woman with a rekindled spark. And it all began with a simple burnt meal and the unexpected kindness of a legend. The diner still smelled of coffee and frying food, but now, beneath it, there was a faint, hopeful scent of creativity, like a melody just waiting to be heard. Weeks turned into months. The autumn leaves had given way to a biting winter, and now the first hesitant buds of spring were appearing. Life at Melody's diner continued its steady rhythm, but for Elsie everything felt different. The ghost of the burnt omelet no longer haunted her, replaced by the warmth of Elvis's words. Her guitar, once a silent ornament, now sat propped beside her bed, a constant companion. Her sketchbooks were filled with charcoal drawings of diner life, vibrant watercolor landscapes, and abstract bursts of color that captured her changing moods. She wasn't famous, but she was creating. She was living her Sunday, one brushstroke and one chord at a time. The financial burden, though still present, was less crushing, managed with the unexpected generosity of Elvis's tip and her own newfound sense of empowerment. One crisp morning, as Elsie was wiping down the counter before the lunch rush, a delivery truck pulled up outside Melody's diner. The driver, a gruff man Elsie knew from his regular deliveries of bread and milk, carried in a small flat package wrapped in plain brown paper. "Package for Elsie," he grunted, setting it down on the counter. "Looks like it's been through a few post offices." Elsie looked at it curiously. She wasn't expecting anything. The package had no return address, just a neat handwritten label with her name and the diner's address. Postmark was from a city several states away. A city she vaguely remembered hearing was near Graceland. A tiny shiver ran down her spine. Could it be she waited until her break, her hands itching to open it? She took it to her usual booth by the window, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Carefully, she peeled back the brown paper. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a beautiful brand new set of professional-grade watercolor paints. Colors were rich and vibrant, far more luxurious than the cheap student set she had bought herself. And beneath the paints, nestled in a velvet pouch, was something even more remarkable. A small silver guitar pick. It gleamed under the diner lights. Elsie's breath hitched. She picked up the guitar, pick her thumb, tracing the smooth surface on one side. It was plain, but on the other, etched delicately, were two simple, meaningful words: "Keep singing." And then she saw it. Tucked beneath the velvet pouch was a small, cream-colored note card. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Dear Elsie," it began. "Elegant. I hope these bring you joy and help you keep that beautiful spark. Alive saw a little something on the news. About I'll let 2 lives." He had cared enough to follow up, to send a gift that spoke directly to her heart, to her dreams. He hadn't forgotten the cook from the diner who had served him a burnt omelet. He had gone out of his way to offer encouragement, to confirm that he believed in her. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the elegant script on the note. This wasn't just a gift of paints and a guitar pick. It was a gift of validation, of continued belief. It was a reaffirmation that the connection they had shared that rainy afternoon was real, profound, and not just a fleeting moment for a busy superstore. She ran her fingers over the new paints, then clutched the guitar pick tightly. "Keep singing." He truly understood. He had seen her heart, seen her hidden artistic soul, and encouraged it to bloom. The burnt omelet had truly opened a door to the unexpected, a door Elsie never would have dared to dream existed. It wasn't just a lesson about mistakes. It was a lesson about the enduring power of human connection, and how one unexpected act of kindness from a stranger, even a legendary one, could inspire a life to flourish. Spring blossomed fully, and with it so did Elsie's spirit. The new paints transformed her artwork, bringing her sketches to life with vibrant hues she hadn't dared to use before. The silver guitar pick became her constant companion, a small, tangible reminder of Elvis's encouragement. She practiced daily, her fingers flying across the fretboard, her voice gaining strength and confidence. One evening, a small art gallery coffee shop down the street from Melody's diner announced an open call for local artists. Elsie hesitated, her old fears of not being good enough whispering in her ear. But then she remembered the note. The world needs more authentic art, and the guitar pick in her pocket felt warm. She submitted a few of her diner-inspired watercolors, prouting the faces and everyday moments she had learned to see with new eyes. To her astonishment, 2 weeks later she received an acceptance letter. Her paintings would be displayed for a month. The night of the gallery opening, Elsie stood nervously among the small crowd, watching people admire her work. She overheard someone say, "Look at the light in this one. It just captures the warmth of that old diner." Another person commented on the expressive faces she painted. Elsie felt a quiet pride swelling in her chest, a feeling she hadn't thought possible. A few weeks later, the same coffee shop hosted an open mic night. Elsie, heart pounding, signed up. When her turn came, she walked onto the small stage, her guitar feeling both heavy and impossibly light. She looked out at the faces, some familiar from the diner, some new. She took a deep breath, and then she began to play. Her song was simple, heartfelt. It was about burnt things, burnt omelets, burnt bridges, burnt-out dreams. But it was also about the unexpected spark, the kind voice that saw beyond the charred edges, the power of starting over. She sang about finding her own melody again, thanks to a moment of kindness from a king. She didn't explicitly mention Elvis, but the story was clear, woven into the lyrics and the raw emotion of her voice. When she finished, the small room erupted in applause. She saw Sal in the back, tears in her eyes, beaming with pride. Elsie, her own eyes glistening, bowed slightly. She had sung her song, her own song. Life at Melody's Diner continued, but for Elsie it was no longer just a means to an end. It was still her job, her way of providing for her mother, but it was also a place of inspiration, a canvas for her art, a stage for her music. She had found a way to weave her dreams into her reality, not by abandoning her responsibilities, but by embracing them with a renewed spirit. Sometimes late at night, when the diner was empty and quiet, Elsie would hum the tune she had written. She'd look at the booth where Elvis had sat at the kitchen, where she had cooked that fateful burnt omelet. She understood now that true kindness wasn't about grand gestures alone, but about seeing the humanity in another, about offering understanding when judgment was expected. The burnt meal, once a symbol of her rock bottom, had become the unlikely catalyst for her rebirth. It was a reminder that even in the most ordinary moments and from the most unexpected people, a single act of compassion could ignite a spark that changes everything. Elsie, the cook at Melody's Diner, now knew deep in her heart that her life was finally singing its own beautiful, authentic song, and she had a burnt omelet and a king to thank for it.